I froze when I saw him. Mark, my ex-husband, sitting at the far end of the restaurant with a glass of wine in his hand, laughing that familiar laugh I once thought was charming. For a second, I couldn't breathe, as if the world had gone silent, and all I could hear was the thumping of my own heart. The place was elegant, full of warm light and low music, and I had walked in expecting a quiet dinner with Ethan, my colleague who'd become one of the few people I trusted since the divorce. But the moment my eyes landed on Mark, all the air seemed to vanish. His back was straight, his suit perfectly tailored, his hair combed the same way he used to before every business meeting. He looked exactly like the man I had married, and nothing like the man I had left. Ethan noticed my stare and leaned closer. "That's him, isn't it?" His voice was low, almost cautious. I swallowed, forcing a nod. "Yeah, that's Mark." Ethan's eyes softened. "Do you want to leave? We can go somewhere else." I shook my head. "No, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. My palms were damp, my chest tight. I hadn't seen Mark in over a year, not since I packed up the kids and walked out of our life together. I thought I had buried every piece of him under the weight of long nights, working odd jobs, the exhaustion of raising twins alone, and the slow rebuild of who I was supposed to be. And yet here he was, laughing with the same arrogance that had once made me feel small, worthless, trapped. Mark hadn't noticed me yet. He was too busy charming the people at his table. I recognized two of them, his old business partners, the ones who'd invited us to fancy dinners where I always felt like an outsider. They were smiling at him like he was untouchable. I used to smile at him that way too. I reached for my glass of water, hands trembling slightly, and took a sip to steady myself. Ethan placed his hand over mine briefly, grounding me before pulling back. "You okay?" he asked again. "Yeah, it's just strange seeing him. After everything." Ethan gave me a nod that said he wouldn't push further. He turned to wave down the waiter, giving me space, and I took the moment to breathe, really breathe. Because deep down, I knew why I felt this way. It wasn't fear of him anymore. It was shock at seeing how far I had come, and how far he had stayed exactly the same. I looked at Mark again, but this time I didn't see the man who had broken me. I saw a memory, a chapter one had closed. Still, it made me wonder how it all started, how I let myself believe in a life that wasn't really mine, and why it had taken me so long to walk away. My fingers brushed the edge of my phone lying on the table. Its reflection caught the restaurant's amber light, almost blinding me for a second, and that's when it hit me. A year ago, I wouldn't have been here. I would have been at home, waiting for him to come back from late meetings, wondering if I had cooked dinner right, wondering why he barely looked at me anymore. I would have been smaller, quieter, someone who thought existing in someone else's shadow was enough. But tonight, I was here on my own terms, in my own clothes that I had bought with my own money, about to have dinner with someone who actually respected me. Still, the sight of Mark pulled me back into the past, back to the choices that had led me to this exact moment, back to when I first met him, when I still believed love alone could make someone happy forever. I let out a slow breath and whispered to myself, "How did I even end up here like this?" And with that thought, my mind drifted back to where it all began. I grew up in a small apartment on the edge of Springfield, Illinois. It wasn't much, one bedroom, one living room, a kitchen barely big enough for two people, but it was ours. Just me and my mom. She worked as a receptionist at a local clinic, often coming home late with tired eyes, but a smile that never seemed to fade. We didn't have much money, and I knew that early on. There were weeks when dinner meant macaroni with canned tomato sauce, and our idea of dessert was toast with sugar sprinkled on top. But my mom never made it feel like we were poor. She made it feel like we were safe, like the world outside our little apartment couldn't touch us. She used to tell me, "Ava, you don't need the world to hand you things. You just need to know what you want and work for it." And I believed her. From as far back as I can remember, I loved languages. I would sit by our small window, watching the highway lights in the distance, repeating random words I found in library books. Spanish, French, even bits of German. Words fascinated me. how they could mean the same thing, but sound completely different depending on who said them. By the time I was in high school, it was clear. I wanted to be a translator, someone who could take words and connect people who didn't even share a language. It felt powerful, like a kind of magic. That's how I met Professor Richard Cole. Well, met is a strong word at first. He was a guest lecturer at our school, a tall man with silver hair and an energy that filled the room. He talked about how language wasn't just communication, it was connection. The way he explained things, you could feel how much he loved what he did. Years later, when I got into the university language program, I ended up in his class. And he remembered me. "You're the girl who asked about idioms that day, aren't you?" he said, smiling like we were old friends. He became my mentor, the one who believed in me when I wasn't sure I was good enough. He helped me get my first real job at a travel agency, translating documents and helping foreign clients. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. For the first time, I felt like I was on the right track, building something for myself. Back then, I was shy but full of hope. I had friends, but I didn't date much. Most of the time, I spent my evenings studying or working extra shifts. I told myself I had all the time in the world for romance after I had a stable career. My mom was proud of me. She'd say, "You're going to do amazing things, Ava." And I believed her because she never lied to me. But life has a way of sneaking up on you. Sometimes it doesn't matter how careful you are or how clear your plans seem. One person, one decision can change everything. For me, that person was Mark Thompson. When I first met him, I thought he was everything I had been waiting for. Confident, kind, successful. He looked at me like I was something rare, something worth noticing. And for a girl who had spent most of her life blending into the background, that attention felt like sunlight after a long winter. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous it is to mistake attention for love. But at the time, I couldn't see it. I didn't want to. I was about to trade years of careful independence for the idea of security, for someone who promised I would never have to struggle like my mom did. I thought that was happiness. I thought love meant never worrying again. I was wrong. And yet, if I'm honest, a part of me is grateful. Because without Mark, I wouldn't have learned what real strength looks like, and I wouldn't be who I am now. But I didn't know any of that back then. Back then, all I saw was a man who seemed like he could make every dream I had come true. And that's how it all began. I met Mark on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day you don't expect your life to change. I was working the front desk at the travel agency, sorting through a pile of reservation requests. The office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the usual mix. That's when I heard the door open and saw him walk in. He was taller than most men I'd met, dressed in a tailored gray suit, shoes polished enough to catch the fluorescent light. He carried himself like he owned every room he stepped into, and the way he smiled, charming, confident, almost disarming, made me forget whatever I'd been doing. "Hi," he said, voice deep and smooth. "I'm here to set up a corporate travel account for my team." Mark Thompson. I nodded, suddenly aware of how I was smoothing down my hair without thinking. "Of course. I'm Ava. Let's get you started." We spent the next 30 minutes going through options, destinations, and pricing. He listened intently, asked smart questions, and every time our eyes met, there was this flicker of something, like he already knew me. When he left, he gave me that same smile again. "You're very good at what you do, Ava. It's rare to find someone who pays attention to details like that." I remember blushing, mumbling some awkward thanks, and then watching him walk out the door like he belonged to another world, one far glossier than mine. A week later, he called back to thank me for the excellent service and, almost as an afterthought, asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. I said yes before my brain even caught up with my mouth. Our first date felt like something out of a movie. Mark talked about his work, project management for a large construction firm, and how he loved building things that last. He told me about his plans to move up to senior management, maybe even start his own company one day. And he listened to me, really listened, when I talked about my love for languages and my plans for graduate school. "You're incredible, you know that," he said, looking at me like I was the only person in the room. No one had ever looked at me like that. For someone who had grown up watching her mom sacrifice everything just to get by, the idea of being cherished, even spoiled, felt intoxicating. Soon, coffee turned into dinners, and dinners turned into weekends together. He always picked the restaurant, always paid the bill, always opened doors for me. I'd never been treated like that before, and I convinced myself that this was what love was supposed to look like. Someone taking care of you, so you didn't have to worry about anything. When Mark proposed a year later, it was like something from a dream. He did it in a fancy restaurant, right in front of everyone, kneeling with a velvet box in his hand. People clapped when I said yes. My mom cried when I called her, saying, "You deserve to be happy, Ava. You deserve this." And I believed her. I believed him. Back then, I thought I'd found my safe place, my forever. I told myself love was about trust, about leaning on someone who promised they'd never let you fall. I didn't notice the little things. How Mark always had to choose the place we went, how he never asked what I wanted, but told me what I needed. I thought that was confidence, not control. I didn't see the red flags. I didn't want to. All I knew was that I felt chosen. And for a girl who had spent most of her life blending into the background, that feeling was everything. If only I had understood then, being chosen isn't the same as being loved. But at the time, I thought I was stepping into the life I had always dreamed of. And for a while, it even felt like it. Marriage with Mark started like a picture-perfect story. We moved into his condo downtown, a place twice the size of the apartment I grew up in, with marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view that made me feel like I was finally living in a different world. At first, I thought I was happy. I stopped working at the travel agency because Mark said, "You don't need to worry about money anymore. Focus on us, on the home, on our future family." It felt romantic at the time, someone who wanted to take care of me completely. But little by little, I started to notice something. Decisions weren't mine anymore. What we ate, where we went on weekends, even how I decorated the condo, it all seemed to come with Mark's final approval. If I bought throw pillows that didn't match his vision, he'd give me that polite smile and say, "Maybe return them, babe. We don't want it to look cheap." I told myself it was fine, he had good taste, right? When I got pregnant just a few months after the wedding, he was thrilled. Twins, a boy and a girl. Mark practically beamed when the ultrasound tech said, "Looks like one of each." He kissed my forehead and whispered, "Perfect. Just perfect." But pregnancy hit me hard. Morning sickness wasn't just mornings. It was all day. Some days, I could barely get out of bed. Mark tried to help at first, cooking basic meals, bringing me ginger tea, but I could see his frustration. He'd mutter things like, "My mom worked right through her pregnancy," or, "Other women don't act like it's the end of the world." I laughed it off then, thinking he was just stressed, but deep down it stung. When the twins were born, Arya and Liam, life became an endless blur of feedings, diapers, and sleepless nights. I loved them fiercely, but I also felt like I was disappearing. My hair was always a mess, my clothes had spit up stains, and most days I didn't even recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror. Mark didn't help much with the night feedings. "I have to be sharp for work," he'd say, rolling over while I rocked 2 crying newborns at 3 a.m. And when I asked for help during the day, he'd sigh and remind me how hard he was working to provide for us. Little comments started to slip out, like tiny cracks in our foundation. "You used to dress up more. Remember when you wore heels? Maybe if you organized the house better, it wouldn't feel so chaotic. Don't be so emotional, Ava. The kids need a calm mom." I started believing him, believing that maybe I was failing, that maybe I wasn't enough, not as a wife, not as a mother. Then my mom got sick. She'd been my rock all my life, and watching her fade broke something in me. I needed Mark's support, but instead he grew distant. He went on more business trips, stayed late at the office, and when he was home, his phone was always in his hand. The day my mom passed away, Mark hugged me briefly and said she's in a better place. Then he left for a dinner meeting. I sat there holding our twins, tears soaking their little heads, and for the first time I felt completely alone, even though my husband was just a room away. That night, I realized something terrifying. I had built my whole world around someone who didn't see me anymore. Maybe he never had, but I pushed those thoughts away, told myself it was just grief, just exhaustion. I tried to be better, quieter, easier to love. I didn't know then that the real storm was still coming, and it would shatter everything I thought I knew about our marriage. If only I had listened to that small voice in my head whispering, "This isn't what love feels like." It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of night that feels so ordinary you'd never expect your world to tilt. Mark had left his phone on the coffee table before heading to take a shower. That alone was unusual. He guarded his phone like it was made of gold. A message flashed across the screen. I wasn't looking for it, I swear. But the preview lit up clear as day. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Lena, my breath caught. Lena Ward. I'd heard her name once before. Someone from his office, a woman he had mentioned casually and then quickly changed the subject. My hand shook as I unlocked the phone. The passcode was still my birthday, something that felt almost cruel in that moment. And there it was. Weeks, no months of messages, pictures, hotel reservations. My chest burned as if someone had poured acid down my throat. I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning, and I couldn't keep up. Mark walked out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, whistling like life was perfect. He froze when he saw me holding his phone. "Ava, what are you doing?" His voice was sharp, defensive. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I just stared at him, my voice shaking but low. "How long, Mark?" He scoffed, running a hand through his wet hair. "You're really going to do this now? Don't be dramatic." Dramatic? My voice cracked, but I didn't back down. "You have a girlfriend, Mark. A girlfriend." He rolled his eyes. "She's not a girlfriend. It's complicated. Look, Ava, you've changed. All you do is talk about diapers and grocery lists. You've let yourself go. When was the last time you even cared about how you looked? You're boring now. Lena's different. She actually cares about staying interesting." The words hit harder than the betrayal itself. Boring. House hen. Worthless. Every sacrifice I had made for him and for our family felt like it had turned into ammunition in his hands. Something inside me snapped. I thought I'd cry, beg, maybe even forgive if he asked. But no. I stood up, clutching the phone like proof of my own clarity, and said, "I'm done, Mark. I'm leaving with the kids." He laughed. That same arrogant laugh I'd once thought was charming. "Where will you go, Ava? Back to that shoebox your mom left behind? You haven't worked in 6 years. You have no money, no job. You think you can make it on your own? You'll come crawling back, begging me to take you in." I felt my hands tremble, but my voice stayed steady. "I won't crawl back. Not to you. Not ever." He smirked, crossing his arms. "Fine. Leave. I'll make sure you get the smallest child support possible. You'll see what real life looks like without me." That night, after he left for a late meeting, probably with her, I packed up essentials for me and the twins. I didn't take much, just what I could fit in 2 suitcases. Clothes, diapers, important papers, and the photo of my mom holding the twins the day they were born. Driving away from that condo, I expected to feel panic, maybe even regret. Instead, I felt light. Terrified, yes, but free in a way I hadn't felt in years. The twins slept quietly in their car seats, unaware that their lives were changing forever. I looked at them through the rearview mirror and whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." For the first time in a long time, I actually believed my own words. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done living as someone else's shadow. Starting over with 2 toddlers and no income was like trying to climb a mountain barefoot. I moved into my mom's old apartment, the one-bedroom place I'd grown up in. It felt smaller than I remembered, but it was ours. Aria and Liam were too young to understand why their cribs were in the same room as my bed, why the toys they loved so much were now stuffed into one corner of a space barely big enough to breathe. But they adjusted faster than I did. Kids have a way of doing that. The first weeks were brutal. I applied for every job I could find: cashier, receptionist, even night shifts cleaning offices. I landed a part-time job at a small grocery store, stocking shelves before sunrise. It wasn't glamorous, and it barely covered rent and food, but it kept us afloat. Every dollar felt like a lifeline. There were nights I cried quietly in the bathroom, not wanting the twins to hear. I cried for the life I thought I had, for the woman I used to be, and for the fear of what might come next. But every time I stepped out of that bathroom, I forced myself to smile, because they needed me strong, even when I didn't feel strong at all. Then one afternoon, while picking up a few things at a corner shop, I heard a familiar voice. "Ava, is that you?" I turned and saw him, Professor Richard Cole, my mentor from college. He looked older, silver hair, now fully white, but his eyes were the same, kind, sharp, observant. "Professor Cole?" I could hardly believe it. He smiled. "What are you doing here? I thought you'd be running some big translation firm by now." The laugh that escaped me sounded more like a sigh. Life happened. Kids, marriage, divorce. His expression softened. "I'm sorry, Ava. Truly. But you were one of my best students. You have a gift. You still translating?" "Not really. I've been busy surviving." He nodded slowly, then pulled a card from his wallet. "Call me. I have a friend who runs a translation business. Remote work, flexible hours. I think they'd love someone like you." I took the card, not daring to hope too much. But that night, after the twins went to bed, I stared at it for a long time before finally sending an email. By morning, I had a response. By the end of the week, I had my first freelance translation assignment. It was small, just translating a short business proposal from French to English. But when I hit send on that completed file, I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief, from pride. For the first time since leaving Mark, I felt capable again. The twins noticed, too. Aria drew a picture of the three of us with big smiles and taped it to the fridge. In shaky preschool handwriting, she'd written, "We love you, Mom." Liam brought me a bunch of wildflowers he'd picked from a sidewalk crack and said, "For you, Mommy, because you work hard." I kept those flowers in a glass cup for weeks, long after they dried, because they reminded me why I couldn't give up. The freelance work grew slowly but steadily. Some days I translated menus, other days business contracts, and eventually I started teaching beginner Spanish online for extra income. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every paycheck, every thank you from a client, stitched me back together piece by piece. One night, I stepped onto the balcony, looked at the city lights, and whispered to myself, "We're going to be okay, better than okay." And for the first time in years, I believed it. I didn't know then that life had another twist waiting for me, one that would bring me face to face with Mark again. But this time, I'd be a completely different woman. A year can change everything. When I walked into that restaurant with Ethan, I wasn't the same woman who had packed up 2 suitcases and cried behind a steering wheel. I had my own income now, steady freelance work, a growing list of clients, and even a small emergency savings fund. The twins were thriving, and so was I. But seeing Mark again, it was like standing in front of a mirror that showed 2 versions of my life, the one I had and the one I'd walked away from. Mark sat at the far end of the room, laughing a little too loudly, gesturing with a glass of wine like he was still the star of his own show. His friends, business partners, by the look of it, nodded along, pretending to be impressed. It was the same performance he'd given countless times when we were married. Except now I wasn't part of the audience. I felt Ethan's hand briefly touch mine under the table, a quiet question. "You okay?" I gave him a small smile. "Yeah, I'm okay." And I was. A waiter approached our table. "Miss Thompson, your table is ready upstairs. We've reserved a private room for you." Mark's head snapped up at the sound of my name. His eyes found mine, and for a moment he froze. I saw recognition, then disbelief. He stood, almost knocking over his chair. "Ava." I hadn't heard him say my name in over a year. It sounded strange, like a word that had lost its meaning. I smiled politely. "Hello, Mark." He looked me over, my tailored dress, my confident posture, and I could see the confusion flicker across his face. I wasn't the exhausted woman in yoga pants and a messy bun anymore. I was someone new, someone whole. "You look different," he finally said, his voice lower, almost cautious. "I am different," I replied simply. One of his colleagues chuckled nervously. "Mark, are you going to introduce us?" But he didn't. He just stood there, staring, like he was trying to piece together how the woman he'd once called boring and worthless was now standing in front of him, looking like she didn't need him, or anyone, to be complete. Ethan stepped forward slightly, his presence calm but firm. "We're running late, Ava." I nodded. "Right. Excuse us, Mark. Enjoy your evening." I turned and walked away, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. There was no desire to shout, no craving to prove anything. The life I was living now was proof enough. When we reached our private table upstairs, I caught my reflection in a window, a woman standing tall, smiling slightly, eyes clear. For the first time, I realized just how far I'd come and how small Mark looked now. Not physically, but in the space he took up in my mind. Downstairs, I imagined him returning to his table, forcing a laugh, pretending my presence didn't bother him. Maybe he'd even tell himself he didn't care, but I knew better. I saw the flash of regret in his eyes, the quick calculation of what he'd lost, and that was enough. That was my revenge, not screaming, not payback, but peace. Ethan lifted his glass. "To new beginnings." I smiled, clinking mine against his. "To finally being free." That night, when I got home and peeked in on Arya and Liam sleeping, I felt a calm settle over me. I'd worried for so long that leaving Mark had broken my life beyond repair. But looking at my kids' peaceful faces, at the small apartment filled with laughter and warmth, I finally understood. Leaving him hadn't broken me. It had saved me. When we left the restaurant that night, the city air felt softer somehow, like even the wind knew something in me had shifted. Ethan walked me to my car, offered a warm smile, and said, "You did great in there, Ava." I laughed quietly. All I did was say hello. "Exactly," he said, eyes steady on mine. "You didn't flinch. That's not the Ava I met a year ago." He was right. A year ago, I would have avoided Mark, ducked behind a menu, maybe even left the restaurant entirely. Tonight, I'd faced him with calm certainty, not because I wanted to prove him wrong, but because I didn't need his opinion anymore. Driving home, I thought about everything that had led me here. The heartbreak, the fear, the exhaustion of starting over. There were so many nights I thought I couldn't do it, that maybe Mark was right and I'd end up crawling back. But each time I wanted to give up, I remembered the look in my children's eyes, how they relied on me, believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. When I got home, I checked on the twins. Arya was curled up with her favorite stuffed rabbit, and Liam had one tiny hand stretched across his pillow as if reaching for someone in his dreams. My chest ached, but not from sadness. This was gratitude, pure and overwhelming. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the silence wrap around me. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was peace. A year ago, I thought leaving Mark meant losing everything. Security, love, stability. But standing there in my little apartment, I realized I'd gained more than I ever lost. I had freedom. I had a career built with my own 2 hands. I had children who were growing up in a home filled with love and laughter, not control and contempt. Mark had been wrong about me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't boring. I wasn't worthless, and I didn't need to tell him that. My life now was proof enough. The next morning, Arya woke up early and climbed into my bed, pressing her little hand against my cheek. "Mommy, can we make pancakes today?" The smiley face ones. I kissed her forehead. "Of course, sweet girl. Pancakes it is." Liam stumbled in behind her, hair sticking up in every direction, mumbling, "Extra syrup, please." I laughed, pulling them both into my arms. "Deal." We made pancakes together, a mess of flour and giggles, and I realized this was happiness, not some grand gesture or perfect life someone else handed me, but small, everyday moments I built myself. Later, as I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while they colored at their little art station, I whispered to myself, "We made it, we're really okay." No, we were better than okay. That night at the restaurant had been my closure. I didn't need revenge in the way I once imagined. I didn't need Mark to admit he was wrong, or to beg for forgiveness, or to see me succeed. The real revenge was simply this: living a life so full of love, peace, and purpose that his absence wasn't a loss at all. I thought about what I'd say to anyone standing where I once stood, scared, lost, convinced leaving would destroy them. I'd say, "You're stronger than you think. You are worth more than someone else's approval. And sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find what you really deserve." As I tucked Arya and Liam into bed that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a deep, unshakable hope. And I knew, whatever the future held, we'd be just fine. Because I had finally found myself, and that was everything.